Hey everybody, welcome to DadsDen of Pop Culture with a book recommendation this week. Now this is a book I have actually talked about on this channel before. One of the first videos I ever did, whatever it's now, 3 years ago, where I kind of talked about some forgotten books that I thought were well worth reading. I just happened to have read this one again recently. Actually, I listened to it, an audio version that was on YouTube. This is a book in the public domain, so don't worry, it wasn't anything sinister. And I thought I'd like to do another video where I maybe go a little bit more into this book, and I'm not covering several things at once. So the book is called The Lost Continent, The Story of Atlantis by C.J. Cutliffe-Hyne, first published in magazine serial format in 1899, and then in 1900. It was published as a hardcover book. And I regard it as it's a really interesting, first of all, it's a really good story. And I enjoyed the story. I enjoyed the writing. I enjoyed the characters in it. Just a lot of great stuff. But it's also kind of interesting as this sort of proto-pulp fantasy sword and sorcery book. Now, the sorcery in this is probably actually more like science that looks like sorcery, but it's close enough. People run around with swords. You get the idea. It could very easily be a predecessor to Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Age. The language is maybe a little bit more formal. It may be a little wordier than the pulp fantasy you'd get later. Kind of artifacts of when it was written, but it's still, from an historical standpoint, if you're a fan of Robert E. Howard or Clark Ashton Smith, this is one you really might want to read. Now, Ballantine issued a paperback version in 1972 with an introduction by Lynn Carter, and it was adapted apparently in 1944 for Famous Fantastic Mysteries in an abridged format, but like I said, it is public domain. I first found it on Project Gutenberg, a website with public domain books, and you could download them for Kindle and for other formats, and really kind of fell in love with it. I read it over lunch over the course of several days, and like I said, there's an audio version you can find on YouTube that's actually pretty well done. So the book has a framing story of this strange, compressed, layered mineral discovered like by an amateur archaeologist. And this ends up being translated by a professional who actually kind of sought to cheat that amateur out of monies earned on this. And they tell the story of Deucalion, a priest of ancient Atlantis, and his battle with the Empress Berenice to save that civilization. Now, Deucalion is a figure from Greek mythology, son of Prometheus, his mother variously Clymene, Hesione, or Pronoia, fun names to pronounce. His wife in the mythologies is Pyrrha. He was a survivor of a deluge brought up upon the world by the wrath of Zeus due to the hubris of Lycaon and his sons, who were descendants of Pelasgus. Okay, a lot of names. This stuff doesn't really work its way into the book, but that's kind of why Deucalion is the character who's used. You could think of it as sort of like, here's the real story behind that myth. All right. So what are the elements of this that I think make it worthwhile? Well, one is that it is beautifully written, evokes a lost world. Like I said, it's somewhat wordier than you would maybe get in later fantasy fiction, although maybe not in the case of Tolkien. Here's a piece from the book. Now, this is after Deucalion, who was the governor of Central American provinces of the Empire of Atlantis. And so he was sort of off in the sticks doing his thing when he's called back to Atlantis by the Empress. Okay, so he's been sort of out of the game, out of the loop. He doesn't know what's been going on in Atlantis. I believe, in fact, he didn't know there was an Empress yet. That was a relatively recent development. So he's called back and he's made this journey There's been some good action, some stuff. Well, he's finally going to now meet this empress who everybody seems, well, very impressed by and maybe very frightened by as well. So here's how that passage goes. But presently came the two wonders of all that dazzling spectacle. From out of the eclipse of the houses there swung into the open no less a beast than a huge bull mammoth. The sight had sufficient surprise in it almost to make me start. Many a time during my life had I led hunts to kill the mammoth, when a herd of them had raided some village or cornland under my charge. I had seen the huge brutes in the wild ground, shaggy, horrid, monstrous, more fierce than even the cave tiger or the cave bear, most dangerous beast of all that fight with man for dominion of the earth, save only for a few of the greater lizards. And here was this creature, a giant even amongst mammoths, yet tame as any well-whipped slave, and bearing upon his back a great half-castle of gold, stamped with the outstretched hand and bedecked with silver snakes. Its murderous tusks were gilded, its hairy neck was garlanded with flowers, and it trod on in the procession as though assisting at such pageantry was the beginning and end of its existence. Its tameness seemed a fitting symbol of the masterful strength of this new ruler of Atlantis. Simultaneously with the mammoth, there came into sight that other and greater wonder, the mammoth's mistress, the empress Forenice. The beast took my eye at first from its very uncouth hugeness, from its show of savage power restrained, but the lady who sat in the golden half-castle on its lofty back quickly drew away my gaze and held it immovable from then onwards with an infinite attraction. I stood to my feet when the people first shouted at Forenice's approach, and remained in the porchway of my scarlet pavilion till her vast steed had halted in the center of the square, and then I advanced across the pavement toward her. All right, a few things you get in this. Well, first of all, the very descriptive language. You get that this is a primordial age, so this is before the Egypt that we know of, although Egypt is mentioned as a colony of Atlantis, and one of the more urbane colonies of Atlantis. Europe is also mentioned, but it's home to absolute savages. Yeah, just terrible, terrible, terrible people up there in savage Europe. So we get the descriptive text. We get a little bit of the world building there. We hear the mention of slaves. Now, obviously, as with ancient Egypt, as with, frankly, most ancient societies, there is that. And that's somewhat important to the story as well. The idea of Atlantean hierarchy. There is a way to do things, and Deucalion is very much a supporter of that. He is a priest, he's a warrior, he's a governor, but he's very much, this is the way things are done. This is how our civilization is set up, and it's important to keep it that way. Forenice is not quite the same. She doesn't mind being at the top of that hierarchy, but she has disdain for the old traditional ways and pretty much does whatever the hell she wants. You also get a taste, though, of Forenice. Now, Forenice is not just sort of this pretty, maybe seductive woman. Forenice is a genuine badass in this book. In fact, there's a lot of female characters in the book that are very, very cool. One of them is Neis, who is going to be very important to Deucalion's life. Now, this is how she is described. She is a daughter of Zaemon, the old priest, the head of what is left of the old Atlantean priesthood, the upholders of society, of the empire, of law, who serve the sun god. He also has a daughter named Ilga, who's a fangirl to the empress. But this is very fiery, nice. Now, to set this scene up, Deucalion he's taken a little tour of this Atlantis that he's entered into that's very unfamiliar to him now. Forenice desires him to be her husband, the emperor. And he's not so sure about it. And he comes upon a sort of a castle, really kind of, part of the walls of Atlantis. So it's a gatehouse, I guess you could call it. And the soldiers there are basically having a little bit of sport, throwing prisoners to these giant cave tigers that are chained to the walls, and they release the chains and let them go after these people, with folks making bets, etc. So, again, the windlass clanked, and the tethering chains drew the great beasts clear of the doorway, and again, a valve of the farther door swung ajar, and another prisoner was thrust struggling into the circus. A sickness seized me when I saw that this was a woman, but still, in view of the object I had in hand, I made no interruption. She clapped her back to the great stone door by which she had entered, and faced fate with glowing eye. Gods! There have been times in early years when I could have plucked out sword and jumped down and fought for her there for the sheer delight of such a battle. But now policy restrained me. The individual might want a helping hand, but it was becoming more and more clear that Atlantis wanted a minister also, and before these great needs, the lesser ones perforce must perish. Still, be it noted that, if I did not jump down, no other man there that night had sufficient manhood remaining to venture the opportunity. So Nace has been thrown to the beast. Why? Because she is a rebel. She's fighting in the resistance against Forenice. And she is something else. She is a woman to be dealt with. She manages to escape those cave tigers, making this amazing leap to this window, and Deucalion helps her in, and she almost then attacks him because she's ready to scrap. You do get a sign here, though, of him talking about Atlantis needs me, there's all this stuff going wrong, etc. He's very keenly aware that something's not right, and maybe by marrying Forenice, he can put it right. But he's not really desirous to do that because she's so outrageous in the way she, just ignores tradition and upturns things. So like I said, this book also has an element of proto-pulp sword and sorcery fantasy. There are some great fight scenes. One of them is against this sort of a sea monster when Deucalion's making the trip to Atlantis from Central America, I think it is. I think it's supposed to be basically the lands that would become the Aztec Empire at some point in time. So there's that, but then there's also a fight, and here you get to see a little bit of Forenice in action. Now this is a long couple passages, but I want to read them because I think they're really great and really kind of give you a taste of what's going on in the book. I was not coveting a fight, but it seemed as if there would be no avoidance of it now. The robe and the glittering gauds of which Forenice had recently despoiled the merchant drew the eyes of these people with keen attraction. I'll just throw this in here. Her rule is making a lot of regular Atlanteans quite poor. Crime is up. You get the idea. The fishers in the boats padded into the surf, which edged the beach, and leaped overside and left the frail basketwork structures to be spewed up, sound or smashed as chance ordered. And from the houses and from the filthy lanes between them poured out hordes of others, women mixed with men, gathering round us threateningly. "Have a care," shouted one on the outskirts of the crowd. "She called down fire for the sacrifice once today, and she can burn up others here if she chooses." "So much the more for those that are left," retorted another. "She cannot burn all." "Nay, I will not burn any," said Forenice, "but you shall look upon my sword play till you are tired." Wow. Now, one of the reasons Forenice says this is, well, she can't bring the fire down here. Because, like I said, it's not really sorcery, it's science. But one of the keys to Forenice, she was this girl, this peasant girl, adopted into a noble family, who sort of takes over. And she figures out the secrets of the Atlantean priests on her own. There is some wondering by Deucalion, was she actually sent by the gods to punish us because we had strayed from their proper worship? Did they give her this knowledge so that she could topple Atlantis? But so she's incredibly smart, incredibly beautiful, and she can really kick ass too. They closed in, jostling one another to be the first, and the reek of their filthy bodies made us cough. A grimy hand launched out to seize some of the jewels, which flashed on Forenice's breast, and I lopped it off at the elbow so that it fell at her feet, and a second later we were engaged. "You're back to mine, comrade," she cried with a laugh, and then drew and laid about her with fine dexterity. Bah, but it was mere slaughter, that first bout. The crowd hustled inwards with such greediness to seize what they could. that none had space to draw back elbow for a thrust, and we two kept a circle round us by sheer whirling of steel. It is necessary to do one's work cleanly in these bouts, as wounded left on the ground unnoticed before one are as dangerous as so many snakes. But as we circled round in our battling, I noticed that all of Phoenice's quarry lay peaceful and still. By the gods, but she could play a fine sword, this dainty empress. She touched life with every thrust. Yes, it was plain to see now, an example was given, that the throne of Atlantis had been won, not by a lovely face and a subtle tongue alone. And, as a fighter myself, I did not like Phoenice the less for the knowledge. I could but see her out of the corner of my eye, and that only now and again, for the fishers, despite their ill knowledge of fence and the clumsiness of their weapons, had heavy numbers and most savage ferocity. And as they made so confident of being able to pull us down, it required more than a little hard battling to keep them from doing it. By the gods, it was at times a fight my heart warmed to, and if I had not contrived to pluck a shield from one fool who came too vaingloriously near me with one, I could not swear they would not have dragged me down by sheer ravening savageness. And always above the burly uproar of the fight came very pleasantly to my ears Phoenice's cry of Deucalion, which she chose as her battle shout. I knew her, of course, to be a past mistress of the art of compliment, and it was no new thing for me to hear the name roared out above a battle din. But it was given there under circumstances which were peculiar, and for the life of me, I could not help being tickled by the flattery. Condemn my weakness how you will, but I came very near then to liking the Empress of Atlantis in the way she wished. So there we go. I mean, this is like Conan and Belit. It kind of reminds me how, Edgar Rice Burroughs' Princess of Mars, Dejah Thoris, in the books is, kind of a princess. She's a damsel in distress for the most part. In the movie, they make her more of a warrior. Well, here it is, 1899. And old CJ has made his Empress one hell of a warrior right from the start. And like I said, Nace is pretty awesome as well. And I know I said Nace and I said nice one time. I'm not really sure how you pronounce her name. We'll just go with nice. How about that? But you also get the bit here with him saying, I came very close to liking the Empress. Now, one of the things about Deucalion is he's pretty damn square. He's by the book. He's rigid. He's very traditional. He doesn't like the decadence that he's seeing. And he's a guy who's sort of never really had a relationship with a woman because, well, it was unmanly. He had things to do. He didn't have time for women. He didn't have time for that kind of softness in his life. There were colonies to conquer and rule, etc. You get the idea behind this guy, but here he is kind of going, man, I kind of almost like this chick who I know is, kind of crazy, but what could I do? Look at her fighting like that. And he has those same feelings towards Nice. The other thing I liked about this book, so you get a lot of this kind of, it's fun action and adventure. It's a great little book like that, but it's also a smart book with some pretty interesting musings on the fall of civilizations, the loss of foundational values and virtues, given physical force, in this case, by the eruptions of volcanoes and earthquakes. And yes, I don't think this will be a spoiler alert if you understand the story of Atlantis, the sinking of that continent beneath the waves. This is, after all, the story of this lost continent and its last days on Earth. I won't tell you much more than that, though, because there is an unbelievable spectacle at the end of this book. You just got to read it. You can't read this thing without saying, this ought to be a movie. Or you could do like an animated series or just a live action series. This would be absolutely amazing. And it's not a remake, it's really, it would be an adaptation. You want to do something like Lord of the Rings or what have you, and that's tough to get right. Here's something fresh, something new that you could do that with. So you get some really interesting ideas, and they actually track pretty well with some of the theories about how complex societies do at a certain point kind of seize up and fail and fall apart. Action, adventure, romance, little philosophy, and it's woven into the story. It's not like you get a philosophy lecture every so often. It's woven in. If you think about it, though, you'll start to understand and see the patterns, and how they play out. You get a warrior queen and a rebel princess. Well, sort of a princess. You get mammoths. You get pyramids. You get sea monsters. You have cave tigers. Battles against all odds. And like I said, the spectacular end of Atlantis. What the heck more could you ask for? And it's not a super, super long book, by the way. Get it for free from Project Gutenberg. You can listen to it for free on YouTube, and I highly suggest that you do. It's a fantastic thing. Like I said, I've read it a couple times now. I enjoyed it just as much the second time as I did the first. There was a little gap in between. But still, I enjoyed it the second time as much as I did the first. You might want to check this out if you've read it. I'd love to hear what you think in the comments. If you have any questions, please put them there as well. I'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed this little review of The Lost Continent by C.J. Cutliffe-Hyne, give me a like, maybe think of subscribing, maybe share with a friend. I do all sorts of pop culture on this channel, not just books, but also comic books, movies, TV shows, toys, games, board games, and role-playing games. Oh, yeah. Deucalion, lawful good. Foreignese, probably lawful evil. Not quite chaotic evil, but she's got some chaotic tendencies that are floating around in there for sure. Nace, I don't know, maybe chaotic good. Okay, just this would, by the way, be a really great setting for a D&D game. It could be sort of those last days of Atlantis, but maybe not right at the end. You can imagine a really interesting continent to have adventures on. Well worth reading, or just to get ideas for your own campaigns, right? So there is a role-playing game aspect to this. Any rate, until next time, God bless everybody. Please be kind to one another. Have a little bit of fun out there. And I will hopefully see you again soon in Dad's Den of Pop Culture. Bye-bye.